Темна нічка горю крила, полонину всю залила, а в ній постать сніжно-біла. Гуцул Ксеню в ній пізнав. Він дивився в очі сині, тихо спершись на соснині, і слова палки любові він до неї промовляв. Гуцулко Ксеню, я тобі на трембіті, лиш одній цілім світі розкажу про любов. Душа страждає, звук трембіти лунає, а що серце кохає, бо гаряче, мов жар. Вже пройшло гаряче літо, гуцул іншу любив скрито, а гуцулку чорноброву він в останню ніч прощав. Черемоша грали хвилі, сумували очі сині, тільки вітер на соснині сумну пісню вигравав. Гуцулко Ксеню, я тобі на трембіті, лиш одній цілім світі розкажу про любов. Душа страждає, звук трембіти лунає, а що серце кохає, бо гаряче, мов жар.
Така любов буває раз ніколи. Вона ж промчить над зламаним життям. За нею будуть бігти видноколи. Вона ж порве нам спокій до струни. Вона ж слова поспалює вустами. Спини мене, спини і схамени.
Душа страждає, звук трембіти лунає, а що серце кохає, бо гаряче, мов жар, бо гаряче, мов жар, бо гаряче, мов жар.
And a brand new release by a brand new artist, at least to the Nash Holos Music Library. His name is Rendezvous, and there he was for you with the Ukrainian classic, A Tango by Wesolowski, Гуцулка Ксеня. Добрий вечір, шановні радіослухачі, та вітаю вас всіх на радіопередачу «Наш голос» радіо українського коріння, котра подається вам, як звичайно, щосуботи о 6 годині на багатомовній радіостанції AM1320 CHMB у місті Ванкувері і по мережі PCJ Радіо Міжнародному. При мікрофоні Павліна Макварі, дякую, що рішили перебути зі мною наступну годину. Ми маємо дуже цікаві новини на сьогоднішній програмі і чудову українську музику. Hello there and welcome to Nash Holos Ukrainian Roots Radio here on AM 1320 CHMB Vancouver and in international syndication on PCJ Radio International. I'm your host, Paulette Demchuk-McCrory, Pukrinska Pavlina. Thank you so much for joining me. We've got a great program lined up for you today. On this week's show, we've got Ukrainian Jewish heritage and an interview with Natalia Fedyszczak of the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, and she'll be telling us all about books and book fairs. And speaking of books, we'll also have a Knyzhka Corner book review. So stay tuned for all of that. As well, we've got our usual proverb of the week, other items of interest, and great Ukrainian music. And coming up next is a group from the United Kingdom. They are called Cossacks, and a song called Beyond Yasidila, kind of taking a traditional Ukrainian folk song just a little beyond. Cossacks with Beyond Yasidila.
Я сиділа біля віконця, біля відкритого вікна. До мене циганка, до мене чорнява, я аж під віконце підійшла. До мене циганка, до мене чорнява, я аж під віконце підійшла. Та же дівчину, білу рученьку, гай я тобі поворожу. Хоч я циганка, хоч я молода, я всю щиру правду розкажу. Хоч я циганка, хоч я молода, я всю щиру правду розкажу. Є хлопець молодий, він п'є горілку, мед, вино. Він грає карти виграває, про тебе ще забув давно. Він грає карти виграває, про тебе ще забув давно. О, як він може про мене забути, коли образок на стіні. Ой, як він може про мене забути, коли синочок на руці. Ой, як він може про мене забути, коли синочок на руці. Дитину дітсадок віддай, а сама йди поміж дівчата, кращої долі пошукай. А сама йди поміж дівчата, кращої долі пошукай.
Canada's National Ukrainian Festival returns to Dauphin, Manitoba August long weekend, celebrating 55 incredible years. Early bird weekend passes will be available December 2nd, as well as day passes and camping passes. The on-site attractions, grandstand variety shows, and hourly ongoing entertainment on 4 feature stages are all included in your one-pay admission. No extra fees. Get your tickets and more info at cnuf.ca.
Thanks to the foresight and generosity of its donors, the Shevchenko Foundation has been investing in the future of the Ukrainian-Canadian community for over 50 years. Since 1963, the Shevchenko Foundation has been funding initiatives that strengthen our Ukrainian-Canadian identity and enhance our Ukrainian-Canadian cultural heritage. These include fine and performing arts and arts groups, museums, cultural centers, education, as well as authors, journalists, and the Ukrainian-Canadian media, including this program. The Foundation strives to become the premier not-for-profit foundation in Canada, which acknowledges the Ukrainian-Canadian community as a fundamental component of Canadian society. Nash Holos listeners are encouraged to support this vision through continued donations into the future. To apply for grants, make a donation, or for more information, visit shevchenkofoundation.com.
Коробочку раків приносить, а я ті раки забрала, а я кого з хати прогнала. Іди, Якове з хати, бо на печі батько та мати, а за пічку батькові діти, ні до тебе, Якове, діти. Не пішов же Яків додому, та заліз у хишку в солому, а собаки гавкати стали, поки батько й мати не стали. Наробили галасу діти, так що нудно в хаті сидіти. Я забрала раки у миску, сама пішла спати у хишку. Коли туди батько приходять, і у мисі раки знаходять, хто з тобою тут же не гався, і хто приніс раки, признайся. Поки мене батько питався, а мій Яків з хишки убрався, через тин та через городу, наробивши батькові шкоду. Не приходь же, Якове, нічу, бо буде сторожа під піччю. Мене батько й мати все лають, а що тебе ніяк не піймають.
Ukrainian-American group Korinyev, and one of those courtship songs, Yakiv, and that translates as Joseph. Up next, coming north of the border from Montreal, we have Lesya, and a more contemporary rendition of a traditional Ukrainian folk song. It's called Chervonaya Kalanonka, which translates as the red guelder rose or high bush cranberry.
Червона яка
Welcome to Knižka Corner, book reviews by Myra Junik, Ukrainian stories in English.
In this edition of Knižka Corner, we will be discussing Serge Sipko's groundbreaking book, Starving Ukraine, the Holodomor and Canada's Response. Starving Ukraine is a richly detailed history of Canada's response to the Holodomor, the Great Famine in Ukraine in 1932-33. By examining Canadian newspapers, contemporary letters, and government documents, Sipko paints a shocking picture of famine and death, and the Soviet government's denials of these events. Sipko probes several important questions. What was the nature of the coverage in the Ukrainian language press in Canada? How did the pro-Soviet segment of the Ukrainian community respond to the stories about famine in the Soviet Union? What relief efforts existed among Ukrainians, Mennonites, and others in Canada? How did the Canadian government respond to petitions about the famine? Canadians learned of the famine from a multitude of contradictory sources, including newspaper articles, personal letters, political speeches, and organized events to protest this Soviet atrocity. Serge Sipko's examination of Canada's response to the famine begins with the Edmonton Journal's commentary about a scarcity of wheat in Ukraine in early April 1932. This was the earliest reporting about the Holodomor in the mainstream Canadian press. However, in May, the Toronto Star journalist Pierre von Passen contradicted this report by praising Stalin's policy of collectivization and describing living conditions in Ukraine as very satisfactory. Contradictory reports about the Holodomor would continue as the Soviet government covered up its complicity in starving millions of people. Sipko's book is organized chronologically, beginning in 1932 and ending in 1934. Chapter titles are quotations from contemporary documents about the Holodomor. Early chapters such as We Are Starving Terribly and Starvation, Real Cause of Soviet Trial examine the causes and impact of the Holodomor on the Ukrainian people. Later chapters such as What to Believe About Russia and What Are 1 Million in a Population of 162 Million examine the Soviet cover-up of the starvation. The final 3 chapters examine the responses of various groups to the Holodomor, including the Canadian government, the pro-Soviet community in Canada, aid groups, and the League of Nations. What did Canadians know about the famine as it was happening? The Soviet Union tightly controlled access to the Ukrainian countryside by foreigners. As a result, information was contradictory, and reports of starvation were dismissed as an overreaction. The Soviet Union refused foreign aid, claiming there was no famine. Despite the fact that the events of the Holodomor were raised in the Canadian press, Canada's response was tentative. However, the response of the Ukrainian community in Canada was more powerful. There were compelling articles in the Ukrainian language press and protests throughout Canada urging Canada to help those suffering starvation. Canadian politicians also urged provincial and federal governments to help the victims of Stalin's collectivization policies. James G. Gardner, leader of the Liberal opposition in Saskatchewan, made a powerful plea for helping those starving in Ukraine on March the 20th, 1933. Surely the great nations of the world can find a way to get this food to the proper place in the proper way. We must say, these people must not die. Sipko's book is an important contribution to Holodomor studies, since it examines how Canada responded to the horrific events. The contradictory newspaper articles about starving people by journalists such as Pierre von Passen and Walter Duranty are shocking. The Soviets were very effective in co-opting the press into reporting what they wanted to hear. However, there were many journalists in Canada, America, and England who spoke out about the Holodomor. This should be a reminder to all of us about the importance of the free press in a time of political turmoil. Starving Ukraine provides readers with detailed contemporary and archival research, as well as an extensive bibliography which would be very useful to anyone doing further research on this topic. Serge Sipko is a coordinator of the Ukrainian Diaspora Studies Initiative for the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Alberta. He has published Ukrainians in Argentina, 1897 to 1950, The Making of a Community, as well as One-Way Ticket, The Soviet Return to the Homeland Campaign, 1955 to 1960. Starving Ukraine should be required reading for anyone who wants to understand the history of the Holodomor and how Canadians responded to this international crisis. Starving Ukraine is available at Chapters Indigo and Amazon.
Thanks, Myra. Join us again soon for another edition of Kanishka Corner, book reviews by Myra Junik, here on Nash Holos Ukrainian Roots Radio. Canadian pianist Maria Dolnecki with Waltz by Levko Ruvitsky, 19th century Ukrainian composer. Up next, very popular Ukrainian group from back in the 1980s, Nizhudes, and a traditional Ukrainian patriotic song, Oi Ulusi Chervona Kalena, another song about that highbush cranberry, also known as a Gelder rose, and that is kind of the national tree of Ukraine, a very symbolic plant indeed. Nizhudes with Oi Ulusi Chervona Kalena.
Червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо. Марширують наші добровольці у кривавий там, визволяти братів українців з ворожих кайдан. А ми наших братів українців визволимо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо. А ми наших братів українців визволимо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо. Ой, у полі ярої пшенички золотистий лан, розпочали стрільці українські з ворогами там. А ми тую ярою пшеничку і зберемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо. А ми тую ярою пшеничку і зберемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо. Як повіє буйнесенький вітер широкий степі, то прославить по всій Україні січових стрільців. А ми тую стрілецькою славу збережемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо. А ми тую стрілецькою славу збережемо, а ми нашу славну Україну гей розвеселимо.
This is CHMB, AM 1320, Vancouver.
Coming up next, a contemporary rendition of a traditional Ukrainian resistance song. And can't tell you who the performers are. This was one of those YouTube treasures. The song is called Hey Hu, Hey Ha.
Гей, гей, га, таке то нам життя, нам плечники готові, прощай, моє дівча. Сьогодні помандруєм, не знаємо самі, де завтра заночуєм, чорти ми лісові. Гей, гу, гей, га, чорти ми лісові. Гей, гу, гей, га. А як прийдеться стати зі зброєю в руках, Бандера поведе нас, сама його достяг. І сипнемо 100 тисяч у зубі сатані, а решта Люциферу, чорти ми лісові. Гей, гу, гей, га, чорти ми лісові. Гей, гу, гей, га. Як падеш ти чи пастку, чи зловишся на дріт, на всі питання ката давай один отвіт. Що довго належав, або ж не був Євген, слава залунала далеко, ген-ген-ген. Ей-гу, ей-га, далеко, ген-ген-ген. Ей-гу, ей-га. Чорний – це наше знамено, червоне – це кохання, чорне пекло дно. Усі дівчата знають пекельні барви ці, забути їх не можуть чорти ми лісові. Ей-гу, ей-га, чорти ми лісові. Ей-гу, ей-га. Ей-гу, ей-га. Ей-гу, ей-га.
And now for a look at Ukraine's rich Jewish heritage, then and now, brought to you by the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter based in Toronto, Ontario. If you're a regular listener of Nash Holos, you'll have noticed that we do a fair number of book reviews on Ukrainian Jewish heritage. Many of these books, especially the new releases, come to our attention as a result of book fairs in Ukraine, elsewhere in Europe, and Israel. Natalia Fedyschuk, who is Director of Communications for Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, the sponsor of Ukrainian Jewish Heritage, has been attending book fairs, and she's responsible largely for a lot of these books that we get to review. So she's back from a couple of book fairs this past fall, and she'll tell us a little bit about what book fairs are and what they're all about. So welcome, Natalia. Thanks for coming back on the show, and welcome back home. We have a chance to chat because you've been traveling a lot to book fairs, among other things. So let's talk about the book fairs. You've mentioned book fairs over the years, and I kind of had a vague idea of what they are, but give me a clearer idea.
Okay, so, if we look at Ukraine, the book market is still nascent there, but it's growing. And Ukrainian writers, a crop of writers who are just energetic, they're breaking in onto the European scene. And as a result, you're seeing a growth in interest in books in Ukraine and in these writers. So one of the ways of promoting these writers and promoting Ukrainian literature has been book fairs. The Lviv Book Forum is the oldest book fair in Ukraine, and it was co-founded by Alexandra Koval, who is the current director of the Ukrainian Book Institute, and Andriy Pavlishin, who is a very well-known translator, a historian. He teaches at the Ukrainian Catholic University. And the Lviv Book Forum is one of the principal cultural events in Ukraine. And 6 years ago, Ukrainian Jewish Encounter got a booth there and started talking about the publications that we have supported over the years. And several of those publications, they've come out over a course of a number of years. This is now our 6th year participating at the Lviv Book Forum and as a sponsor. Some of the books that we have had displayed are Jews and Ukrainians, A Millennium of Coexistence, which is co-authored by Paul Robert Margucci and Yohanan Petrovsky-Stern. Babin Yar, History and Memory, which is a collection of monographs by writers, and mostly historians and cultural figures from Ukraine and Europe. And that book was published, and it was dedicated to the 75th year anniversary of Babyn Yar. We have the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, Cultural Dimensions, which is co-edited by Wolf Moskovich and Alti Rodal. Professor Moskovich is on our board of directors. Ms. Rodal is a co-director and co-founder of UJE. And this was based on a conference that took place in Jerusalem a number of years ago. And then Alti Rodal's book, The Ukrainian Jewish Encounter from Antiquity to 1914. And this book is based on a traveling community exhibit that went to 6 Canadian cities in 2015. And it's a beautiful book that looks at this exhibition, highlights from that, and builds on it. And then this book also accompanied an exhibition that we had in Lviv earlier this year in May.
Right.
And so we have been displaying these books at the fairs. And we've also participated in Arsenal, which is a very important book fair that takes place in May in KU. And our books are also displayed in Dnipro, in Medvin, which is a more specialized book fair in KU that just took place. So the book fairs are ways of promoting not only Ukrainian writers, but also showing the public some of our work and what we're doing. And this year, we also participated in book fairs in London, Paris, and in Frankfurt. Frankfurt is the largest book fair in the world, and I had an opportunity to go there, and it's just overwhelming in a way when you begin to look at all the books from all over the world. But Ukraine, as a country, in Frankfurt, it's had a country stand for a number of years now, but it's very interesting to see the interest that one sees in Ukraine and in the writers that are coming out of Ukraine, because now it has writers that are becoming internationally known.
Well, before we get into that, Natalia, I just was wondering, how are your books from Ukrainian Jewish Encounter received in Ukraine and the other book fairs in Europe?
Well, the books, I would say, have been received quite well. The Jews and Ukrainians book has been presented not only at the book fairs, but also Professor Markucci has been traveling around Ukraine presenting this book. This book has also been discussed in London. So it really sort of looks at this millennium of coexistence between these two peoples. I mean, Jews and Ukrainians have lived, on the territory of contemporary Ukraine for nearly 2 millennia.
Right.
The Cultural Dimensions book, looks at, again, this interaction in the cultural sphere between Ukrainians and Jews, whether that's art or architecture. And it fills a void that we don't always know what is the interaction between these two people. Where do we see elements, art or architecture, in each other's spheres?
Yeah, I've been hearing from listeners as well who have read these books. One in particular who is Jewish from the United States, and he's found them incredibly helpful and illuminating and thought-provoking, and he's getting information and knowledge that he hadn't had before. And it seems so many Jews in North America trace their heritage back to Ukraine in this area in Eastern Europe. That is where Ukrainians and Jews have coexisted, as you say, for this millennia. So it's great that this dialogue has started and is taking place and is accelerating from the sounds of it. Thanks in large part. I mean, Ukrainian Jewish Encounter has been around for 10 years now. You'll be celebrating your 10th anniversary, and you've done incredibly groundbreaking work, including with these books. So good that the UJE books are well received. Tell us about some of the books that you've encountered by new writers. What are some of the topics that are popular?
Well, one of the, and it's not surprising, is the topic of war and how a country deals with that in fiction and nonfiction and in poetry. I was at Medvedi in Chernovitz recently, which is an international poetry festival. And literally, Serhiy Zhadan finished off the festival, and there were hundreds of people hearing his poetry. And it is so incredibly powerful. It deals with war and anger and survival.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, and the writers that I have followed or have dealt with are also looking at where is Ukraine's place within this European sphere?
Mm-hmm.
One of the programs that we have sponsored is a literary residence in Buchach, Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
in partnership with Agnon Literary Center.
Mm-hmm.
And the first group of writers that participated in that were Sofia Andruchovich, Andrei Lubka, Yevgeny Senik. And they had to read writings by S.Y. Agnon, the Nobel Prize-winning writer in the Hebrew language, who was actually born in Ukraine, in Buchach, lived there for the first 19 years of his life, and then left.
Hmm.
And then he came back in the 1930s, and he saw Buchach for a very short period of time. But Buchach has been within his realm of writing almost throughout his entire career. And actually, when he won the Nobel Prize, he was in the midst of writing his Buchach stories. And these stories have now been published by the Agnon House in Jerusalem, where he lived. And so these writers deal with a number of various topics, but they've also been looking at sort of this Ukrainian-Jewish relationship as well within the writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see a whole bunch of different themes now developing in Ukraine and in its literature. Certainly, children's books are hugely popular today in Ukraine. And it's wonderful to go to some of these book fairs and to see that you have special sections that are devoted specifically to children.
Yeah.
And where children's writers will read stories and the children have room to play. Peter Zalmayev, who is a good friend of ours, recently wrote a children's book, and it's both in Ukrainian and in English with wonderful illustrations.
Oh, great.
So we are seeing this larger development.
So imagine the topic of war, though. They would have a lot in common with Israeli writers. Israel is in a war as well as is Ukraine. So have you been to book fairs in Israel? And is this conversation going on there as well?
Well, yes. The Jerusalem Book Fair recently changed its format.
Oh.
Before it was a fair that was open to the public, and, they had writers who gave presentations, just as you would in other book fairs. And they recently changed that format to be more oriented towards professionals. But in the previous years that we participated, and this festival takes place every 2 years, we had gone with Irina Karpa. She has a very unique, distinct style. We also went then 2 years later with Katerina Babkina and had supported the translation of her poetry into Hebrew.
Oh.
And the feedback from Israelis was, well, people thought that she was writing about Israel and the situation in Israel. And she says, well, no, I'm writing about our situation.
Wow.
And so Israelis were able to immediately connect with Babkina's poetry. It was in the same vein.
Wow.
And it was very impactful. And she had an opportunity to present her poetry at the book fair and then in other venues when she was in the country.
Wow.
So we do see this link today.
Wow. So you mentioned that you were at a book fair in Frankfurt, Germany, and you were very excited about it in private communications that we had. So tell me about what was so exciting about that one.
Well, it was an opportunity for UJE to display the books that we have been supporting and to also, I think, show to a larger public that the Ukrainian Jewish conversation is not something that is being ignored in Ukraine, that there is an ongoing conversation, that this is an important relationship and it's recognized. And that for me was an important component. Our books were part of the catalog that was presented at the book fair at the Ukraine country stand, which I have to say was just really magnificent. It was very large. I think just the ability to see on display the wealth of Ukrainian literature, not only in the Ukrainian language, but in English, in German, to see books that have been translated into French, and they were also on display. Because the way Frankfurt works is the first half of the fair is for professionals, where book contracts and deals are discussed and made. And then the second half, it's open up to the general public. And I was there just for one day, which was the professional day. It's like a 6-day fair, so it's quite long. And so I wasn't there to see the reaction of the public, but just to be able to see different people walking around and looking at the books. And it gave, at least for me, I felt like there is an interest in Ukraine. Maybe Ukraine is not at the level that it hopes yet to be, but steps are being taken to widen the influence of books and Ukrainian books on an international level. And I think it's also part of cultural diplomacy. I mean, that is a very important component for any country, for any organization. So those were some things that were exciting for me.
So over the years, as you've been going to book fairs, is there anything in particular that attracts you that you would want to explore, a particular author, book, or topic, in particular on our series or for Ukrainian Jewish Encounter? I suppose, what attracts your attention?
The book fair that we've been dealing with the longest is the Lviv Book Forum in Lviv.
Mm-hmm.
And it's less of what I would like to see, but what I think we've heard from other individuals is that they want to have thematic approaches, because we have a very large program. And if one looks at our website, UkrainianJewishEncounter.org, right now the program is in Ukrainian, but you'll get a sense of how large our program was this last year. People more and more, I think they want to start looking at themes. You know, what are the themes within the Ukrainian Jewish relationship? And people have said that they want to hear more about, let's say, the relationship between Ukrainian and Jewish women. Where was the intersection with them? It's interesting in the sense that some people, are saying, oh, it would be really interesting if we looked more at what was the work in science fiction, let's say, because that's, I guess, a very huge industry now of writers in Ukraine. And so these are the things that we're looking at more for the future. I mean, next year, I think we'll be looking at Amos Oz and Aharon Appelfeld. These were two writers whose roots are in Ukraine, and January will mark the anniversaries of their deaths. But we would like to be able to discuss and talk about their literature at next year's Lviv Book Forum, because we did support the translation of 3 books, 2 by Appelfeld, 1 by Amos Oz, into Ukrainian. And in a way, this will open the door to Ukrainians, the history of these 2 individuals and how their Ukrainian background influenced their writing in Israel and their works.
Great. And so we'll be able to get our hands on a couple of books from your recent book fair forays?
Yes, well, Katerina by Aharon Appelfeld was already come out, but there are 2 other books that should be done by the book fair, which is why we're looking sort of at honoring these 2 writers at the next book fair in view.
Great. Well, look forward to getting a chance to read them and review them here on our show. And thank you so much for giving us this information about the great work that you're doing in continuing the groundbreaking work of UJE, but particularly it's so important. Books have been important for centuries, and they certainly are continuing to be, and opening lots of eyes and minds and hopefully making our world a better place. Can you tell me, what do you do at a book fair? What's a typical day at a book fair for Natalia?
Well, we have very full programs. I do a short presentation just to tell people about UJE. Andrei Pavlishin, who is our curator of this program, he and I work almost all year long to determine what should the program look like at the Lviv Book Forum for that year. And typically, Andrei opens the panel, then I say something about UJE, then he gives a larger overview of our discussion, and he will be a moderator, or sometimes somebody else will be a moderator. He's fantastic. I mean, he sort of is running all over the place over the course of all of these days.
So he would moderate panel discussions?
Yes, Pavlishin will moderate panel discussions. He's very good. And he's very well respected in Ukraine within this literary community. And
these panel discussions then would be about individual books or authors' works?
I'll give you an example. One of them was Gnon's text from Bucha to Jerusalem. And it was a presentation of the literary residents and the essays that appeared in this little book called A Key in the Pocket. This was in the participation with Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs, who is head of research at the Agnon House, Mariana Maximiak, who is head of the Agnon Literary Center in Buchach, and then also Vasey Machno, who is a Ukrainian writer who has lived for over 20 years in New York now, the wonderful essayist, and he participated this year in the literary residence in Buchach. And so I presented this panel, and then Jeffrey Sachs participated via Skype because his flight was canceled. He wasn't able to get to Lviv for this panel. So in this case, Mariana, Jeffrey Sachs, and Vasily had sort of a conversation with one another. And we had a simultaneous translator who translated. Another wonderful, I thought, little roundtable discussion were Ukrainian Jewish relations in museum collections and art. And this was a presentation of books that had been published by Dukin Litra, and then also the catalog, the books that Alti had written. And so in this case, published and moderated this discussion. It was with Yosef Zisels, Alti Rodal, and Beryl Rodal. And here there was a little roundtable discussion, and that is on our website now. So it's varied. The days are varied, but usually we now have a set format where Publition does the introduction, I say a few words about UJE, and then we go on to the discussion. And we tape the majority of these events, and we put them on our website and on our YouTube page, because not everybody is able to go to a presentation, because at book fairs, it's amazing how many presentations take place at the same time. So it's there, it's an archive of what was said and the important ideas that are discussed at these presentations. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
And the more I've been involved with these fairs, the more excited I get, the more I learn, and, the more you realize the importance of these fairs as well.
Right. Well, thank you so much for enlightening us, and look forward to reading more books in the future and sharing them with our listeners here on Nash Holos. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and for collecting them and bringing our attention to them. Thanks so much, Natalia.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Natalia Fereschuk, Director of Communications for Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, our sponsor here on Nash Holos for Ukrainian Jewish Heritage. I'm Pavlina, producer and host of Nash Holos Ukrainian Roots Radio. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Until next time, shalom. Ukrainian Jewish Heritage is brought to you by the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, based in Toronto, Ontario. To find out more about their work, visit their website and follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Transcripts and audio files of this and earlier broadcasts of Ukrainian Jewish Heritage are available at their website, ukrainianjewishencounter.org, as well as at the Nash Holos website, www.nashholos.com.
Canada's National Ukrainian Festival returns to Dauphin, Manitoba August long weekend, celebrating 55 incredible years. Early bird weekend passes will be available December 2nd, as well as day passes and camping passes. The on-site attractions, grandstand variety shows, and hourly ongoing entertainment on 4 feature stages are all included in your one-pay admission. No extra fees. Get your tickets and more info at cnuf.ca.
You've been listening to Nash Holos Ukrainian Roots Radio, our flagship show in Vancouver here on AM 1320 CHMB Vancouver, and in international syndication on PCJ Radio International. In between broadcasts, please visit us online, where you'll find transcripts and archived audio files, a link to the Nash Holos podcast, and information about the show, and that's www.nashholos.com. There's also a link to our Patreon site there, where you can support our work if you like. Нажами, що скінчили нашу програму, пора нам прощатися на ще один тиждень, вже часто дому і сказати до побачення. Але перед тим я хочу залишити вас такими словами мудрості. Ті люди блудять, які других судять. And our proverb of the week translates as, those who pass judgment on others go astray. And with that, we've come to the end of our program, so to wrap things up, we have Stephen Schwach from Edmonton, along with his Cymbala students, from a CD called Learning Curves and a traditional Ukrainian folk song or dance, Ishumet Ihude, The Blowing Wind. I'm Pavlina. On behalf of all of us here at Nash Holos and AM 1320, thanks for listening and Dobranich. Hi, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the show. If you're not yet a Patreon supporter of Nash Holos, I hope you'll consider becoming one today, with the digital equivalent of a cup of coffee once or twice a month, or maybe even a snack or a meal. There's an option for every budget, and even $1 a month tells me you value the show and my efforts to produce and bring it to you. Becoming a Patreon supporter will give you the opportunity to provide feedback to help me improve the show, create cool swag to promote it, and swap ideas on how to promote Ukrainian culture in between broadcasts and podcasts. Your contribution will also help to preserve a well-established on-air and online venue of almost 30 years running to continue promoting Ukrainian culture and heritage long after I've retired, which will happen sooner rather than later. Your contribution will help that transition happen, and future generations will be able to enjoy the music and other Nash Holos programming that you currently do. To become a Patreon supporter, just go to www.patreon.com and search for Nash Holos. That's patron with an E, spelled Patreon. Or go to www.nashholos.com and click on the orange Patreon button on any page there. Thank you for listening and for your support. Щиро дякую.